Hi, this is Thomas from Apex Game Tools. In this video we'll be taking a closer look at the path service component on the game world. So the path service component is here to be able to configure the Pathfinder, and the Pathfinder obviously is the one responsible for allowing units to find a path from A to B. Now the path service component, as you can see, is visible up here. We have 5 settings, and I'm going to go through each of them. Starting with the engine type, the default is the A-star algorithm, and then you have another option called jump point search. Now the basic A-star algorithm is actually quite slow compared to the jump point search algorithm, so if you can, I highly recommend that you use jump point search. But it does have a few requirements that may not be met by your scene, in which case you will be forced to use A-star. Now these requirements, one of the main requirements is that the grid needs to be uniformly cost. This means that there cannot be specific costs assigned to specific cells. So if you have that case, then you cannot use jump point search. There are a few other scenarios or settings or components that will influence which engine type you can use. In those cases, there will be a warning in the console if you are using a component that will require you to use A-star and not jump point search. Now next up we have the move cost setting. Move cost is how much it costs to move from one cell to another, or rather this is the algorithm used to calculate that cost. The default is diagonal costs, which is an approximation of basic Pythagoras, which is the Euclidean cost. So basically this one is an approximation of this one. It is, however, a bit faster, which is why it is the default, and it is for the pathfinding purposes. In the general case, it is exact enough. So it is recommended that you use this. If you want a little more precision, then you can use Euclidean. Cardinal cost is just here for completion. I would say you shouldn't use that. It will never get better than these two. And finally you have Manhattan, which is here if you have a unit that can only move in the X or Z directions. That means it can never move diagonally. Then Manhattan cost is the right one to choose. And then finally, of course, you have the custom option, which allows you to implement a custom cost provider. This is an advanced topic, so if you need to do that, you should reference the extensibility document included with the product. Next up we have this initial heap size. This is basically a setting that you should only alter if you are told to do so, and you will be told to do so by a warning in the console if you have a large map and and maybe you have some long paths, and this will make you resize the heap. In this case, it will be more efficient to have the heap, the initial heap size, a bit larger, so that you can be without the reinitialization of the heap at runtime. Next up we have the run async setting. This controls whether or not the Pathfinder is running in asynchronous mode. That means that it will be running on another thread. This is on by default. This is the recommended option, since running in a separate thread means that the Pathfinder will not influence the frame rate as it does not influence the main thread. However, there will be certain platforms build targets that does not support async mode, in which case obviously you will need to turn that off. If you do have async mode enabled, you have the option to use a thread pool instead of a dedicated thread. It is recommended that you use a dedicated thread, so it is recommended that you do not check this option. A dedicated thread is has better performance than a thread pooled option. And finally, obviously, if you don't run async mode, you will have the option to specify the max number of milliseconds per frame that you will allow the Pathfinder to use on the main thread. Needless to say, if you only have 5 milliseconds per frame used for pathfinding, finding paths will be slower. Okay, so that's the settings that you can set on the Pathfinder, and then finally we'll be looking at how you can debug, or rather visualize, how the Pathfinder works. This is especially useful if you create your own cost providers to see how they work and how they differ from other cost providers. But you can also simply use it to visualize how pathfinding works in general if you're interested in doing that. So in order to see that, we will add a component called the Pathfinder Visualizer. It takes a unit reference here, and the unit needs to be one that has been configured for navigating. This basically means that the Pathfinder will then know the skills of the unit or the capabilities of the unit for height navigation, the radius of the unit to see where it can fit through and so forth. So just pick an agent that has already been configured. In this case, we have configured the green agent, and the rest of the settings mirror the ones that you can find on the path service component instead itself, because it will simply initialize its own path service. Now the bottom two sections here, the only important one is the step-by-step setting, and we'll just see how that works in a second. So I'm going to start the scene, and then as you can see we get an instruction on how to use this visualizer. Basically you just want to left click somewhere to set a starting point and right click somewhere to set an ending point, and then you can press space to visualize. Now the step-by-step mode means that it will actually step through one step at a time, so that you can see it in a slow motion how the Pathfinder works. So I just keep pressing the space bar, and you can see how the Pathfinder works and tries to find a path from the blue point to the red point. And as you can see, it actually has to expand quite a few cells in order to find its way there. So this is the basic A-star. Now we can also try to reset it and then select the jump point search algorithm instead, and then do the same thing. And as you will see, this searches very differently from the typical A-star, and it also expands far fewer cells in order to get to the destination, which is obviously why it is quite a bit faster. If you just want to see it in one go, you can simply uncheck step by step and then press the spacebar, and you'll see the entire pathfinding in just one click of the spacebar. So that's it for the path service component and the Pathfinder Visualizer. See you in the next video.